Okay, so Ratzinger, he was the prefect of the congregation in 1981. He said that liberation theology movement, he saw it sweeping across, he said, and I quote, "It is a fundamental threat to the faith of the church." Fortunately, it didn't work, but it came close. The church was strong enough to root them out. Now, why did they use the church? Because they wanted control of the government, but the Catholic Church is so strong in Latin America that they couldn't make any headway. They had to get into the church and pervert it. It's about social justice. They use that as a vehicle right into the church. They use the media. In our case, in this today, they want the economic engine for the world. This is a global thing. That's what makes it, to me, seem much more sinister. Today, this is why the border is being such an issue. I told you this 6 months ago. They're going to use the border, and they'll make it all about race. We're not talking about solutions. We're only talking about you're a racist if you want the laws to be enforced. So what happens? How did that happen? Well, identify something you want to control. They want the economic engine of the world. They're Marxist. We've shown it to you. They look for victims big enough to gain power. You have African Americans. You have the disenfranchised. Who's been disenfranchising them? Giant government. You have the unemployed. Let's talk about the Gulf region and closing down the oil rigs. You also have the Hispanic, and that is the one, that's the straw they believe is going to break the camel's back. We've shown you the video on this program before where they're not really even talking about the Hispanic as, I believe what's happening with illegal immigration is modern day slavery. We're not teaching people English. How do you survive in this country if you don't learn English? How do you get along? How do you make a way for yourself? It's modern day slavery, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about people who say enforce the border, and it is racism. We know that if they can cobble this together, they win the next election for the next 50 years. You use, infiltrate, or corrupt the most powerful institution at your disposal. Well, they have the education system. They have the media. They have the capitalist system. What do you think the Tides Foundation was? They infiltrated. They saw under Ronald Reagan that capitalists were not for all of this nonsense. So they infiltrated. Now they're using failing capitalism to destroy it. They're using the churches through social justice, the media. Do I have to explain that one? This is what progressives and all power seekers do. They find something vulnerable, they latch onto it, they exploit it for power. But the problem is, when they do get power, they seem to overshoot the mark a little bit. When they're the ones holding the guns, sometimes it is hard to stop those who said, yes, we can kill white babies. And then there's a whole new group of oppressed. That's not what the founders had in mind. It was about individual pursuit of happiness. It was about individual salvation. It was about your connection with God and your personal right. That's the best way to keep people from being oppressed, but we've abandoned that over 100 years ago. It's time to find it again. I'll show you more on how this relates to today and the news of the day in a minute. Make it clear that even though we've been discussing racism in the last few days, I don't want to make the Black Panthers out to more than what they are. They're really, quite honestly, an anomaly in our society. Within the black community, white community, they're an anomaly. I mean, they are as irrelevant as David Duke is in the white community. He's an anomaly, and everybody knows what he is. I think it's important to recognize, however, what they are trying to do, and that is divide us through racism and hatred. That's what racists do. That's what David Duke, that's what the Black Panthers do. This is what I said on this program 6 months ago. Whether it passes or not is going to be irrelevant, quite frankly, to these people. It is exactly what they need. What's in the bill, it doesn't matter. The issue will be racism. The progressives must reactivate their far-left base. They must smear their detractors. They will call me and Fox News and anyone else. If you believe that we are a nation of laws and not of men, you're going to be called nasty names. And they're not going to listen to any of the facts that you have to say. So it's amazing because one of my producers brought this up in a meeting this morning and said, Glenn, do you remember saying that? I said, I don't. And she said, yeah. And here we are. This is exactly when I said it would happen. I don't think the Panthers are a threat to society. I think the ideas that they get these ideas from, that lead to those crazy ideas, those ideas being institutionalized, liberation theology or philosophy, being institutionalized, that's where the trouble comes in. And that's for you to decide whether that's happening or not. But let's look at the breadcrumbs. For 20 years, Barack Obama was part of Jeremiah Wright's Liberation Theology Church in Chicago. In fact, Obama himself said that he found Jesus through Jeremiah Wright.
I heard Reverend Wright deliver a sermon called The Audacity of Hope. And during the course of that sermon, he introduced me to someone named Jesus Christ. And I learned that my sins could be redeemed.
Okay. Not quite the way you might have learned it. Barack Obama's spirituality comes from the prism of liberation theology, which we showed you about a half hour ago. It's a theology of collective salvation and Marxism. A theology rooted also in dividing the races. You're familiar with what Jeremiah Wright's anti-white sermons, you know, how he's been saying. I mean, how many times have we heard this guy? Well, it comes from the very foundation of liberation theology. Now, here's liberation founder James Cone, quote, "The coming of Christ means a denial of what we thought we were. It means destroying the white devil in us. Reconciliation to God means that white people are prepared to deny themselves whiteness, take up the cross, blackness, and follow Christ, the black ghetto." What? Marxism and racism are embedded in the foundations of this teaching. So if you find Jesus and salvation through these ministers, is that like me finding capitalism through Karl Marx? It doesn't work. I am not questioning the president's salvation. I want you to understand that he believes in something called collective salvation, which we explained a half hour ago, and I don't want my words to tell you that. I want you to hear the president's words on collective salvation next. All right. We're talking about salvation and Barack Obama's view of salvation. Here's where it comes from. Watch.
And recognizing that my fate remained tied up with their fates, that my individual salvation is not going to come about without a collective salvation for the country.
Okay.
It's because you have an obligation to yourself. Because our individual salvation depends on collective salvation.
Okay, this is not Christianity. My salvation is not connected to your salvation. That is a grave perversion. It is liberation theology. Now, ministers, I am in so much trouble tomorrow because the power structure of this country is in the hands of people, quite honestly, like Jim Wallace. And they are going to pit me against all religions. You'll see a smear campaign on me like you haven't seen yet. Baptists, Jews, Catholics. Okay, great. You can listen to Jim Wallace on Catholicism, or Catholics, you could listen to Pope Benedict and how he feels about collective salvation. Wherever, quote, wherever politics tries to be redemptive, it is promising too much. Where it wishes to do the work of God, it becomes not divine but demonic. That sums up nicely what we've been trying to say about social justice as understood by Jeremiah Wright. Collective salvation. Ask your priest, your rabbi, your minister about collective salvation. This is why Obama said he doesn't support reparations, because, quote, they don't go far enough. Why don't they go far enough? Because to blot out the collective sin, the white man has to give everything up. Here's founder of liberation theology, James Cone.
The only way in which your repentance, your forgiveness can be authentic your reception of it can be authentic, your repentance can be authentic, is that you give back what you took. And white people took a lot from black people.
Do not make this about race. Please make this about God. Collective salvation. Collective salvation. I want to thank Richard Land for his advice today, and also Anthony Bradley for being here on the program today. The truth shall set you free, but it's going to make you miserable first. From New York, good night, America.